In this video, I just want to talk just a moment here and show you some things about what's possible when you're managing these threads. Now, I did a video called Spawning Threads, and if you haven't seen that, you may want to go take a look at it because we used the thread class. And when we were doing the thread class and we're working with it manually, we can manage a lot of things about threads, and that's what I'm talking about here. Now, this will give you an idea of where you're headed and kind of the universe you're jumping into when you start working with multi-threaded applications. And also, this will give you a bit of an appreciation for what's going on in the background when we use like Task Parallel Library or the async and await functionalities that I'll show you a little bit later on in the course as well. So the first thing you can see when you're working with threads manually is that creating or spawning threads is relatively easy. One or two lines of code and you're there. However, managing the various aspects of threading can quickly become very challenging. Now, the system.threading namespace provides classes for working with threads. And just like you saw in our example in that video entitled Spawning Threads, a new thread can be spawned or created using the system.threading.thread class. Now, there are a number of methods and properties that you need to be aware of on that thread class, and so let's just very briefly here talk about those. The methods that are out there and available for you on that thread class is the start method, and this causes a thread to start to run. We used that in the example. Sleep we didn't use, but this will pause a thread for a specified amount of time. Suspend will pause a thread when it reaches a safe point. Now, when you read the documentation and you see about these save points, a save point is a location in code where the CLR determines that it's safe to stop from a garbage collection standpoint. See, that's another thing that starts to come into play here. When garbage collection runs and we have multiple threads out there, the CLR needs to decide, wait a minute, is this something that another thread's going to use? And so a safe point is simply a place where we'll allow the program to run to a point to where the CLR determines that it's safe to stop from a garbage collection standpoint. So you'll see that term safe point out there in threading and just know what they're talking about there. Then there's the abort method. This stops a thread when it reaches a safe point. Resume will restart a suspended thread. And then join will cause the current thread to wait for another thread to finish. And so join's kind of not really a misnamed thing. It's a good name when you think about it, but at first glance, it's not what you think it would be. But notice, you'll see this one quite a bit when you're out there working with multi-threaded applications. Again, it causes the current thread to wait for another thread to finish running. And if you use this with a timeout value, the method will return true if the thread finishes within the allocated time. There are a number of properties that threads have that you can use. The first one being is alive, and this contains the value of true if the thread is currently active and running. Is background gets or sets a Boolean that indicates if a thread is or should be a background thread. Background threads are like foreground threads, but a background thread does not prevent a process from stopping. And then once all foreground threads that belong to a process have stopped, the common language runtime, or the CLR, ends the process by calling the abort method on background threads that are still alive. And then you'll see the name property. This gets or sets the name of a thread. Priority gets or sets a value that's used by the operating system to prioritize thread scheduling. Apartment state can be used to get or set the threading model for a particular thread. And this is real important when you're working with unmanaged code with threads. Whole nother world there. And then thread state, this contains a value that describes a thread's state or states. So as you can see, there's a lot of controls. There's a lot of buttons, a lot of switches that you can work with threads. And the complexity really starts to grow. Now, luckily, it's very easy to use the thread class for simple little things like my little example that I did, and for very simple thread manipulation. But Microsoft's really introduced some really great tools over the last 2 or 3 versions of the .NET framework to really clean this up. And we're going to talk about a couple of those in the next 2 videos. Async and await, really cool. And you do this on a method level. And then we'll talk just a little bit, introduce you to task parallel programming. Strongly encourage you to do some reading and kind of start wading out into the world of threads little by little. This is not something you're really going to gain a grasp on overnight. So start working with it, playing with it, write a little bit of code and tinker around with it. But this is definitely where serious complex applications are. They're not even headed that way. They're already there thanks to multi-core computing and the way we're trying to wreak every little bit of power that we can out of our applications to make them more responsive, more instantaneous feeling for our clients. So that's a real quick look at managing threads. And in the next 2 or 3 videos, we'll go just a little deeper into the threading world.